Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to talk about innovation in piano practice through constraints, and specifically how I'm combining mental practice and physical practice in different ways while I'm traveling, because I have limited time while I'm here. I'm actually in Shanghai, just spending time with family and everything for a few weeks. And on this channel I hope to share with you all some mindset, strategies, methods, and so on that will help you in your piano playing, and hopefully other areas of your life as well. So I work with many adult students, and I would say many of them travel on a very regular basis, and of course the question of practice usually goes right out the window at that time. And mental practice is definitely the best possible solution, or at least a component of the best possible solution. If you can get access to an instrument, that's of course ideal, but many times it's just not feasible. Many times we're going to be spending lots of time like at the airport and hotels and other areas where we just cannot physically practice. So this video is not meant to be a how-to on how to mentally practice either. It's just about, on one level, different ideas for combining mental and physical practice, if you can hopefully already do some mental practice, and perhaps at a deeper level, just my own strategic problem solving in solving this issue of, if I have more limited time, if there's not as much flexibility now in some ways, I don't have as much time physically at the instrument, how do I go about solving a problem such as that? If you search David Chang mental practice, you'll actually find some other long-form videos and probably a bunch of examples of shorts of me actually doing mental practice. So I'm here with my wife and in-laws, and I usually, when I'm at home, I will go to the gym and do mental practice while I'm doing cardio for a little while, and then I'll try to get in a few hours of physical practice in the morning. And I try to stay as consistent with that as possible, even if there's lots of things to do in terms of work. Right, so compared to like the typical busy adult, my work is working with my piano students. It is answering their questions, taking care of things within my studio and within my business. I actually try not to let that interfere with my own personal practice, because I think it's important to set aside time for exercise, sure, but also, of course, since I'm a pianist, to set aside time for my own daily practice, just as the students hopefully would ideally do as well. But here, I don't necessarily have that luxury, because for one thing, there are some things that are more important than piano, and family is one of them. So I'm not wanting to sacrifice that time. I'm not going to say like, I must practice several hours every single morning if we have other plans. And also I'm still teaching and everything normally while I'm here in Shanghai. So sometimes I'm waking up at like 5 in the morning and responding to emails and texts and things right away. And then I am, teaching like a class at like 6 in the morning or something like that. Not every day, but sometimes that happens. Other times we're like out the door right away, or, relatively early in the morning. Maybe we have some little excursion somewhere. Maybe I get to practice piano for an hour or something, and then, we're off to somewhere else. And so the schedule is just kind of turned around. I'm not able to start with physical practice each day. And so what are some of the different ways that I go about solving this problem? So I think broadly of what I call rough mental practice and detailed mental practice. And when I talk about innovation through constraints, I mean the constraint is that I just don't have all this time at the instrument physically each day, and so I'm having to be creative in the way that I'm getting in my practice hours. Of course, I will admit I am not trying to very, very strictly meet my regular practice numbers every single day, because like I said, family is more important. But as much as possible, how can I be creative? And even in all these different sorts of situations, a lot of which are unpredictable, how can I try my best to get in my regular hours, right? So first, in terms of rough mental practice, this is just practice without the score. So this is stuff you can do while you're walking around. If you're running or doing cardio in the morning, if you're waiting for the subway, if you're on the subway and you don't want to take out a physical book, if you're just walking around, anything that you can do, usually I find if it doesn't interfere with your hands or anything, you're able to just imagine as you're walking along. Maybe you can imagine the beginning of Your Elise, you can imagine the beginning of River Flows in You. And as long as you've tried mental practice at all, you've tried it at the instrument, you have you do a little bit of what I call mixed practice, which is play a tiny little section physically, then play that in your head. If you've experimented some with mental practice before, then you should be able to do at least a little bit of it while you're just walking around, while you're just waiting around and so on. So I would say that would be one of the first things. And so on some days, maybe I started doing some physical practice, but if it was only for like an hour or something, I can get in my other hours, like literally while we're just going about the rest of our day. Like maybe while I'm sitting in the car, while I'm sitting on the bus, while we're just like walking around like a mall, and there's just like some downtime. Anytime that we're just like walking, waiting, not doing anything in particular, especially if I would just be on my phone anyway, that's like the perfect time to do what I call, rough mental practice. And this could just be going through, my repertoire in my mind. And it's not an extremely strict, regimented type of practice. Later, if I find that there are fuzzy areas, I will go back to the score. Like I'll look at my actual sheet music, or I'll go physically back to the piano. So this could be done for like another hour, 2 hours or something, just like this. Another way that I can do rough mental practice is just as like little spot checks. Instead of going through my entire repertoire, maybe I am just playing in my head like 1 minute here, 5 minutes here, very akin to like if you have a very busy day and you don't have very much time to physically practice. So even if like we're having a really full day, I still want to get in like little bits of rough mental practice of maybe some of my more difficult pieces and so on. Sometimes the whole picture might be flipped around. Instead of me starting with like an hour and a half of physical practice and then doing the rest of it as rough mental practice or little spot checks of mental practice, maybe I'm starting with mental practice because we stayed at a hotel the night before, and so now I'm waking up somewhere else. And so instead, the next day, I'm starting by going through my repertoire. Like I'm starting to play through all the Chopin etudes in order in my mind as we're going on some sort of long walk somewhere or something. It's kind of just like the background music that's going on in my head. And then maybe later when we get back home, then I can do the rest of it as physical practice, right? So it's I would say it's the most versatile type of mental practice because you can do it pretty much anywhere. It's very, very convenient. And I'd say that the downside is, like performance practice, it's not very precise. So if I encounter issues, again, I'm going to have to go back to the score later, or I'm going to have to go physically back to the instrument later. Now, the other main type of mental practice that I like to do while traveling, but of course could be in other situations as well, is what I call detailed mental practice. And that really is just mental practice with the score. So, for instance, right now we're in this little tea place, and let me see if I can show you. So we had some nice tea here. I've got my music here. And this is Chopin Etude Opus 25 number 5, and I just recorded like a YouTube short or two here as well too. I was actually like, writing specific notation, usually mental practice notations within these little angle brackets, and I'm able to actually literally practice exactly the same way that I would if I were at the piano. So for instance, if I was able to play, like we're able to play from here to here, what I call a 4 measure set, 4 measures plus the next beat, and I were also able to play from here to here, another 4 measure set mentally. And I had indicated those before, like literally while I'm sitting here, I could link these 8 measures together in my mind, right, from memory. So the short version is that basically I can be reviewing repertoire, I can be learning even new repertoire or reviving repertoire. Like in this case, I'm trying to get the Chopin etudes all fully strong in my memory. Again, although it's been very busy recently. And so instead of thinking like, oh, I don't have an instrument, there's nothing I can do about it, I'm going to continue memorizing measures just the same as if I were at the piano. So in terms of detailed mental practice, I can also, for instance, sit in the hotel room or sit here in this little tea place and just go in order through all of the etudes. And I could go about it in a relatively more lenient way. Like I just have the score open in front of me and I'm just like sitting here, doing mental practice like this. And then I'm looking down once in a while when I find that it's particularly fuzzy, and then, go through the whole book that way. Or I could do it much more strictly. Like, just like with physical practice, you can decide how strict or how lenient you want to be, right? So perhaps it could be that unless it's like super, super clear, both of the hands in my mind, then I'm gonna have to carefully practice it. I'm gonna have to break it down separate hands. I'm gonna have to break it into little sections. I'm gonna have to use spaced repetition. All the strategies that I would use if I were physically at the piano, I would use mentally here. And just as strictly as I would assess myself in terms of solving an 8-measure set or segment at the piano, I'm going to be strict in just the same way here, right? There's no reason why it should be any different from physical practice. And then just like physical practice, I'm going to literally mark if I've linked 8 measures together, right? So as I was sitting here just now, I actually was not going in order. I haven't gotten to practice that much today. And so I was actually just flipping to pieces where I feel like my memory is the spottiest, or the sections that are memorized and strong in terms of my mental imagery. Those are the basically they're not strong. The weakest areas, I'm trying to go specifically to those spots, to those pieces, and so on. So akin to if you're just going to your most difficult pieces and sections at the piano, while I'm sitting here, I was thinking like, oh, this piece, it only has like 2 measure sets or segments next to each other. I should link them into 4s. This area, it's kind of fuzzier overall. I should really try to link this 4 and this 8 into a 12. So, yeah. So, I mean, just like with rough mental practice, with detailed mental practice with the score in front of me, there's a variety of different things I could do. I could decide, like, when we're walking around or waiting in line, I'm thinking about other things. I don't have to do rough mental practice all the time. Instead, the majority of my mental practice for the day, it could be the detailed kind where I'm just updating markings in my score, going through in great detail. So for me, the usage of mental practice without the score, rough mental practice, and mental practice with the score, detailed mental practice, even these individual types of mental practice can be utilized in many different ways, in many different orders. And I've also started recording some YouTube shorts recently, which was kind of like a big experiment. It's kind of a little weird to hold the camera up and just record me like kind of thinking about something. But that is authentically what it is that I'm doing. Just like I set up a camera and I record myself physically practicing, I'm like, this is what I look like when I'm doing mental practice. It's funny in the same kind of way as when I put my phone on the side. And it's interesting, when I was doing that, I found that under some pressure, sometimes the images were a little bit fuzzier. So it was almost like performance practice. So this was kind of like a newer little innovation. I feel like recently, I'm like, I should be able to mentally practice under any conditions. So when I'm recording myself, that's putting myself under a little bit of pressure. Can I still keep the images just as clear in this slightly weird, unnatural situation? Because that's what a real performance would be like too. And I found that by forcing myself to make those little shorts, I started to get more in the habit of doing rough mental practice basically wherever I was. I had fallen a little bit out of the habit recently because I was just thinking a lot about other things. And anyway, so I'm doing all these things. I'm trying to keep up with the studio, trying to keep up with my teaching and work and practicing. And I think one of the other thoughts that I had, and it's probably the last thought for this video, how am I going to take these things back to New York with me once this trip is over, right? Because sometimes I'm doing something and I feel particularly happy about it. I'm like, we woke up in some hotel somewhere and I'm starting the day with like doing mental practice while doing some like long walk, and it's very beautiful. And I think to myself, like, well, I invested all this time in mental practice. I don't have to start the day with physical practice each time. If this makes me happy, if today, like, I'm doing 2.5 hours of mental practice and then, maybe just walking around, or maybe I'm doing like 1.5 hours of it walking around, I'm doing 1 hour of it at a coffee shop with the music, I'm doing half an hour physically at the piano once we get home to my in-laws' house, why can't I do that while I'm in New York? Because I was like, oh, once this trip is over, I won't be able to do that. But that actually isn't the case. I can actually, hopefully go to the gym in the morning, and then I can just take the New York City subway to some random, faraway spot, and then take some long walk and get in my, the first hour or hour and a half of practice while I'm walking around. And then I can find some random coffee shop in New York City and do some mental practice with the score there. And that's my main practice for the day. Mental practice is now the main practice. It's now flipped around. And then I can go back home to my apartment and do the rest of it physically, right? So this is the way that my brain is operating. When I'm teaching students, it's not only about the piano playing aspect, it's also about the problem solving aspect, the creativity aspect. We talk about this in terms of the traditional musical sense, like of course you should have creativity in interpretation, in musicality, and everything. But you also want to have creativity in the way that you solve problems, in the way that you are linking different sections together, and even in the way that you solve a larger problem, such as how are you maintaining your practice while you're traveling with all these unpredictable conditions and different circumstances. So these were just some of my personal answers. Hope some of them are helpful to you. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, let people know about the channel. Let me know what questions you have about this. What other ideas do you have in terms of mental practice combined with physical practice while traveling? What other innovations in your piano practice have you created or evolved through constraints when you have more limited time, resources, etc.? I'd love to hear about that. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.